So, welcome back. We'll move on to, there's nothing to report out of the closed session. We're moving on to item 2, consent items.
Move approval of the consent calendar.
Any discussion on this? All those in favor of approving consent, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So we'll move on to item 3, Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency operations update.
Hi, good afternoon. We have a little bit of a shorter presentation today because it is a special meeting. Just 3 quick topics. Update on grant funding, where we are in the joint intake completion project, and then a very quick operations update. There is some good news in the grant funding world. We did finally receive the final $264,000 from the Bureau of Reclamation. We just got that this past week. That's the final block of funding for the joint intake project from the federal government. It ended up being a kind of a very difficult exercise to get that paperwork completed. So we're happy for that. The next step is to close out those agreements as soon as construction is completed. In terms of joint intake completion project, we're getting close to having that finished, and I do have a few pictures. Guardrails have been installed. We installed boulders along the edge of County Road 117. We did coordinate that with the Yolo County Highway Department and with RD 1600. After we got further along with construction, what we found happening is that people are driving both vehicles and four-wheelers getting from 117 onto the RD 1600 levee. CH operations crew did not like that because that also gives them access to our facility. RD 1600 did not like that at all, also because then people can occupy the levee and do who knows what. So we purchased some boulders, and those are installed now, although apparently they're being relocated slightly next week. Planting work has been completed. We are scheduled to do hydroseeding next week. CH2M Hill will be irrigating that for us in the meantime, because as we talked about before, our well cannot do the landscape irrigation and also run our pumps at the same time. So there was a little bit of time that they've actually agreed to do that at no cost to us. And then moving forward, we're at the point now that basically we just have final cleanup work, punch list work, and plan on really having the work completed by end of November. A couple quick pictures. This is a guardrail. The top left is a guardrail between County Road 117 and our piping. And then the next one is a fence next to the river, but just some pictures of guardrail. These are the boulders that were installed. As you can kind of see in the picture, there's a pretty easy access from the edge of pavement onto the top of the levee right at that location. So that's how people were getting on there. We put boulders that is maybe 2 foot of spacing between them, ideally close enough that a four-wheeler cannot make it through there, and definitely not trucks. The reason for boulders rather than a fence, there's really 2 reasons. One reason is that is a project levee, and fences have posts that are driven into the ground, and the Central Valley Flood Protection Board does not allow that because that creates a potential failure mode in the levee. And the other thing that's nice about boulders is that if there is a flood fight, RD 1600 will come out with the equipment, and they can simply push them off to the side with their equipment and then put them back later. So it was kind of a really good solution for a problem that started almost immediately after the grading work was completed. Next, I'll turn it over to Stan for a quick operations update.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. So you can see real quick, one slide, again, special meeting. So looking at the September flows, as you see before you, roughly 19.5 MGD. As you know, we're on our secondary water rights, 10,000 acre feet. We have been for roughly 5 months. Just want to let everyone know, I mean, when that went into effect in June, we had planned, assuming it was going to be through October, which it is apparently going to be. So we have adjusted flows for the past 5 months. We're going to be probably within 2 or 3 days of using up the entire 10,000 acre feet as an agency. So we're right on the money with providing as much surface water as we can, but staying within our limit for the 10,000 acre feet. So just want to let you know. No issues at the plant. Monthly reports going out like normal, and all the water quality and diversion is on the website like normal. So, any questions?
Outstanding, Stan. Thank you. Sure, great to hear. No shutdown.
Are there any questions? All right. Well, thank you for the update. I appreciate that. Why don't we move on to item 4? Richard, are you going to kick this off?
Sure. Following up on the discussion from closed session, you've got before you a set of recommendations relating to settlement of the water rights taxation dispute with the County of Yolo. The first item is just a report item. When the agency board approved the settlement agreement, we approved that in closed session. So the first item is just a public acknowledgement for the record that the settlement agreement has been approved, and it's still in a work in progress for final signature, right? Yes, there's several officers at the county who need to sign it, and so we don't have a fully signed copy yet, but we're just reporting it's been approved by both governing boards, the Board of Supervisors as well as this board. And then the second item is a series of 3 recommendations to the board that would allow agency staff to initiate the process of implementing the settlement agreement. The settlement agreement approves a process involving intake site transfer to the City of Woodland, then City of Woodland annexation of the intake site, and then finally resolution of the Board of Equalization proceedings. And to initiate those various steps, the first 3 recommendations there are laid out. The first one is to authorize the general manager to prepare and deliver a deed to the City of Woodland, conveying your 20% interest in the intake site to Woodland. The second one is just to then consent. As an agency board, you're consenting that you have no objection to the City of Woodland's annexation of the intake site land. And then thirdly, you would authorize your general manager to negotiate a indemnity agreement with RD 2035 to protect 2035 from any future City of Woodland taxes, assessments, fees that could be imposed on the site as a result of the annexation. One of the things I want to add with respect to that last recommendation is it's staff's intention that once that indemnity agreement has been prepared and approved through RD 2035, we would bring it back to the board for your final ratification at a later meeting. And with that introduction, staff recommends the action item set forth in the staff report.
Before we move on to discussion, I'll just open it up for public comment if there's anybody wishing to comment on this specific item. Seeing no wish to do so, directors, do you have any questions or any discussion regarding this item?
No, I'm ready to make a motion to approve staff recommendations A, B, and C.
I second that.
So item 1 and item 2, A, B, and C.
Correct. Item 2, A, B, and C. Item 1, which already happened.
Right, okay.
And
Anybody want to second that?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Just, I missed that. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-0. Let's move on to item 5.
Mr. Tim.
Okay, I'd like to start off introducing this item, then I'll turn it over to Alan Lilly to discuss the agreement in more detail. As you know, the agency has 2 water rights. We have our primary water right, which is usable year-round, however, subject to Term 91 curtailment. We also have the CVP water right, which is available during that curtailment, however, is only allowable for use April 1 through October 31. And we knew that given the rainfall months we had last winter, that we thought we could potentially run into the situation where the Term 91 curtailment extends past October 31, which then puts the agency in the unenviable position of not having access to Sacramento River water. So at board's direction, we reached out to several local water agencies to see does anybody have water available for purchase for winter months. And we did meet with 3 groups overall. The first 2 were rather complicated. The third one, which was before you today, it actually worked out very well. They were very willing to work with us. They wanted to be good neighbors with our agency. So the agreement before you today is really for purchasing 2,000 acre-feet of water beginning November 1. Term 91 curtailment is still currently in effect. The state does daily, or the federal government does daily calculations on the water balance, and it's bouncing above and below the line every day a little bit. They've given us no indication that it will be lifted anytime soon. In talking with our neighbors in the area, the consensus of the group is that it will likely remain in effect until there's some significant rainfall, which could, in looking at the forecast today, there's nothing the rest of this month. So I think we will get into November with a curtailment in effect. With that, I'll turn it over to Alan to talk about the specifics of the agreement.
Is this one on? Yes. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Tim. And members of the board, my name is Alan Lilly. I'm a colleague of Dick Shanahan's. I don't get over here very much anymore. Back when we were working on the water rights and the initial project, CEQA and project development, I was here a lot. And some of you, I'm sure Skip remembers, because he was there. One of the things back in the day was we negotiated the agreement with Conaway Preservation Group, which led to the 10,000 acre-feet per year of water, which, as Stan reported today, has turned out to be quite important this year and will be in many years, where we're going to use, it sounds like every acre-foot of that, so we'll get our money's worth. One of the side benefits of that agreement, which I remember talking to Jim Yost at the time, we sort of put it in the backs of our mind, but weren't sure whether it would ever come up or not. Well, actually, we were fairly sure it would come up, but weren't sure when, is we became a Central Valley project contractor. We now have our own contract with the Bureau of Reclamation, as you know, and that really, to kind of put it in the vernacular, we're now a member of the club. So we can now accept transfers from other CVP contractors, which we could not do, and we're in the authorized place of use for the CVP water rights. So it was really a side benefit. We didn't pay anything for it, and it wasn't really factored into the analysis, but it's turning out to be a very important benefit. So Tim and I have been looking around, talking to different entities around the Sacramento Valley for potential water supplies. And the problem is almost all of the Sac River settlement contractors have the same provisions that we have, which is April through October. So it doesn't do any good for November through March. Well, fortunately, the city of West Sacramento has its own contract negotiated many years ago with the Bureau. And since it's a municipal supply, always has been a municipal supply, it has a year-round season of diversion. And even more fortunately, they're not using all their water. So they had some interest in helping firm up their use. It helps them on renewing their contract if they can show as much use as possible under the contract. So that basically the deal is under the proposed agreement, we would pay them a $50,000 option payment, which is basically sort of a deposit for the first 1,000 acre-feet. And we can take up to 1,000 acre-feet for that $50,000 during November and December of this year. If we go over that, we can take a total of up to 2,000, but we have to pay $50 an acre-foot for any acre-foot over the 1,000. So just depending on operations and demands and so forth, I'd have to ask, if necessary, Tim and Stan can clarify, but if we need to go over 1,000, if Term 91 ends up going in, or remains in effect all the way through the end of December, we have that. And so it's a pretty darn good price, and the main thing is you can keep the plant operating. The other cost West Sac insisted on was up to $10,000 for the fees that they're paying their outside consultant to basically do the analysis, technical analysis, and so forth, and negotiate the agreement. They're going to have to provide us an invoice with their actual time, but I think the way things go, we should assume it's going to be $10,000. So that makes the total a $60,000 payment. Finally, the West Sacramento's contract with the Bureau is on a calendar year accounting basis. So originally, Tim and I said we'd like to have a contract where we can take the water for November through March in case Term 91 goes back into effect if we end up in another drought. And they said, no, we can't do that. We have to be on a calendar year basis. But what they said, and this is not for consideration today, but simply for your information, is, however, we will be very interested in talking to you, say, in December, once we get this contract signed and in place, assuming you approve it, for another contract, one-year contract for 2019. And that would be for potentially up to 2,000 acre-feet for January, February, March, November, and December of 2019. So, and presumably under about the same terms as what we're talking about here. So that, if we can do that, and that, of course, is a future meeting, but it could give us a good backup in case the early part of 2019 is a drought, and then also ultimately have that backup for November, December 2019. And just kind of to finish up this background discussion, the problem is every year this is going to come up. You never know in October when it's going to start raining. I mean, last year, 2017, there was such a big snowpack that Term 91 never went into effect at all. But most years are going to be like this year. So having something in place that we know we can draw on in November, December if we need to is always going to be very valuable for the agency. So we're hoping we can establish a good working relationship with West Sacramento. Now, down the road, their contract with the Bureau, the term ends on June 30th of 2020, and they're, of course, trying to renew that, so they're not going to commit beyond that until they have a new contract. But if they do, then we have potential for even looking at something longer term. And, of course, the other key caveat is this is always going to be subject to if they need the water. Right now, they don't have demands for the whole amount, but if they do, obviously, they have to preserve the water supply for their own users. But it's potentially a good supply for a long time. We're getting our foot in the door. I think it's very valuable to, number one, have the water, and number two, establish the precedent of working relations with West Sacramento and having the Bureau give its written consent to West Sacramento doing this transfer. So if we can do this all in November, December of this year, then when we approach this for next year, we'll already have a precedent of going forward. So I don't think I have anything else to say. I should talk briefly about CEQA, which of course is very important. We have prepared, Tim and I worked with ESA consultants, a proposed addendum number 9 to the original 2007 Davis Woodland Water Supply Project, EIR, that describes this project, November, December 2018 water transfer, that's it, and concludes that there would be no additional significant environmental impacts beyond those already analyzed in the 2007 EIR. So that way we're solid under CEQA. If the Board of Directors first approves addendum number 9, then it has CEQA coverage for approving the agreement. So the way Dick and I have written up the proposed action item, item A is approving addendum number 9, and then item B is approving the contract and authorizing Tim to go ahead and sign that. So I think that covers everything, and I'll be glad to answer any questions if the board members have any questions.
Actually, I'd like to add something real quick, too, that I forgot to mention before. West Sacramento did agree to, this is water at their cost. Their cost is right around $48 an acre foot, they rounded to 50, so they're not really adding anything. The agreement does not include any administrative fees. Initially, we were talking about an options contract. We would pay some dollar amount to just simply reserve the water. In this agreement, we are not doing that. We are simply paying for the water.
For the first 1,000?
For the first 1,000, yes. And the other way we looked at it, too, is looking at, well, what happens without an agreement if the plant does turn off and the cities go back to groundwater? The agency is still responsible for paying the monthly fixed charges at the water treatment plant, which is right around $300,000 per month. The cities would go back to groundwater, which would cost us roughly $30,000 to $40,000 per month. The other risks that we have is we did not look into this too far so far as what happens if the water plant turns off and then turns back on again a few weeks later. Do we get a charge from CH because of that? What kind of startup activities do they need to do to put it back in service again? And then the other potential issue is with the Division of Drinking Water. How would they see that? What kind of additional testing would we have to do to put the plant back in service again? And we did not want to broach that subject with Division of Drinking Water. We don't want them even thinking along those lines. So we're those are the things that if we do not have an agreement, we would have to look into it and come back with some additional potential issues.
Thank you. So, any questions?
I want to hear whatever Paul has to say.
No, I was just going to add
Oh,
one
yeah,
small
go
piece. Sorry, I always have something.
That's my
to say.
question.
No, I would just point again to the fiscal impact analysis. I would add, if Tim missed it, that this arrangement with West Sac, in addition to being having all the benefits, is significantly lower cost than the other water right options that the agency was looking at. Can be readily absorbed within the existing budget because we had put some funding in for this eventuality, so there's really not a mean, there's a cost, but it doesn't have a significant budget implication. It doesn't require any adjustment to the budget, and is again significantly lower than any of the other supplemental water right options. So it's kind of a win-win-win on many respects.
Thank you. So would anyone like to make the first motion for the
Yes,
first
so
item?
I'll make a motion to approve motion, what is written under motion 1 in the staff recommendation.
And Skip seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And would anyone like to make a motion for what's listed in our document as motion 2?
So moved.
Second.
I think Skip was a second on that one. All those in favor
He tends to mumble.
of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 4-0. I do have a question. You had mentioned that there is the possibility of additional agreement for 2019, and you mentioned sort of the January, February, March, and then the November, December timeframe. Would we need a special meeting in order to do that, or is it possible to delegate authority to staff at this time? Should the numbers be roughly similar to what we're approving today, for you to enter into an agreement like that? So our next meeting is not until mid-January, so I'm just wondering, presumably, if we are looking to acquire access to water for January, we would do that prior to January.
December.
Wait, so we're going to need another addendum is the thing.
We would have to call a special meeting if a new contract is ready for consideration prior to January.
Okay.
And Brett, I'm sorry if that leads to an inconvenience, but basically, we didn't want to get too presumptuous with West Sacramento. They ended up, their city council did approve this last night, which is good news, but we just didn't want to have too much official record of going forward with jumping to conclusions. I mean, we're still working things out, so that's why we didn't do anything official for 2019.
That's fine. Having another meeting is not a big deal because I think it's actually Davis's turn to host, so it'll just be right outside my back door. So, but yeah, thank you, staff, for this. I think really good news, and yeah, I mean November's just 2 weeks away, so yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So why don't we move on to item 6?
Item number 6, so the agency happens to be the proud owner of an inflatable rubber dam.
Mr. Chair, I move approval that we authorize the sale of the rubber dam to RD 2035. All details to be handled by our general manager.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Be discussing a plastic pool.
Can it also be used as a bounce house or a trampoline? No? Okay, never mind. I have other ideas.
All right, so now to something fun. Item 7, discussion concerning joint powers agreement amendment to provide for director compensation or stipend.
Then there's another staff report.
This is a follow-up from the last board meeting where we talked about agency director stipends, and I'm here to report back on the status. The bottom line is this continues to be a working legal process. It's a surprisingly unclear question. I've been in substantial correspondence with Harriet Steiner at Best and Krieger, who's the city attorney at Davis, on this issue, and we're both surprised at sort of the lack of governing law and what complicates it. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on the law and this stuff, but you're a joint powers authority created by 2 general law cities, and what the JPA law says is you can exercise the common power of the general law city subject to the restrictions of the general law city. So buried in the laws relating to general law cities is a Government Code Section 36516 that governs compensation to city council members. And generally clear that that statute, because of the way the JPA law is set up, is going to apply to you guys as the JPA directors, because you have to find your authority somewhere, and the only applicable authority is that provision of the government code. The question is, what we're still looking into is whether or not it's got dollar limits up to $500 per year plus inflation adjustments, and the question is that as you're wearing your JPA hat, is that aggregate with your city council compensation, or is it a clean slate and this agency can have its own compensation up to $500? And the answer to that question is just not clear, and we had hoped to have an answer by today's meeting, and unfortunately we don't. And my best advice is unfortunately just to kind of put this over for further direction. Part of the reason I'm being very cautious and conservative is after the city of Bell, and you probably all remember the city of Bell, there have been many prosecutions of governing board members for excess compensation on serving on various commissions, boards, authorities, and whatnot. So it's an area where, as an individual director or city council member, you need to be very, very cautious to make sure that you're staying very, very cleanly on the proper side of the line, and we just need to be cautious for that reason. The other thing I wanted to highlight on is some joint powers authorities have more flexibility. Like I think at the last meeting somebody observed, well, SACOG's able to do this, and the reason SACOG's able to do this is what every joint powers agreement has is you have to specify the agency that's going to govern with respect to the restrictions and the powers. And for your joint powers agreement, it says right there, it's the city of Woodland. For your agency, it really doesn't matter if it said city of Davis, because you're both general law cities, and so the same basic body of laws are going to govern. But for whatever reason, back when this agency was formed, we picked the city of Woodland. What SACOG did is they picked the city of Sacramento as the designated primary agency under that JPA, and that's good for SACOG because city of Sacramento is a charter city, and which has a lot more flexibility on how it's governed, and it's not subject to some of the details in the government code. So that's for example how SACOG's able to treat differently. Your air district, which is a JPA, is similar. There's a lot of parties to that JPA, and so you can kind of pick and choose what's a good agency to designate in your joint powers agreement. And whenever you form a JPA, one of the careful considerations is for the lawyers and the folks setting it up is let's be very careful we pick the right agency. Oftentimes, for example, sometimes there may be an agency that has really flexible competitive bidding powers or high bidding limits, and you want to pick that one because it's going to be more flexible. But for you, it's the limits of a general law city, which are those 36,516, $500 per month limits, and it's just unclear how that applies to a JPA. And BBK's taking a hard look at some of the work I've done and sharpening their pencil and see if I'm right or wrong or if they've got a different tack. And I will report back once I get more information. But unfortunately, as of this meeting, I don't have a firm, solid answer for you guys.
Having initially raised the question, I'd like to say I'm satisfied for now for the analysis that I've heard. I frankly think the most expeditious way to resolve this is through legislation. And at some point in time, I could take the initiative with our Assemblywoman and just say, in view of the proliferation of these JPAs among local governments, this is something that needs to be considered and given perhaps some additional latitude. I wouldn't say unlimited latitude because the Bell situation is a classic example of basically fraud on the public, and we're not contemplating anything like that. Okay?
Any other direction towards? So if I understand correctly, so you're saying you don't feel it's necessary for staff to do any additional research, or?
I wouldn't stop them if there's additional steps they can take, perhaps to find a precedent for it to make it possible to do something here. But expecting that you might find yourself in a quandary, I'm suggesting that at that point we may think of a legislative solution.
And I think that is a good suggestion. For me personally, I'm pretty much done at this point. I'm waiting on BBK.
One thought I had
So I
was-
think we ought to let
yeah.
them sort of finish their work and see what they come back with.
I'd also thought we could ask one of our members to get a legislative counsel's opinion, or they can also request an attorney general's
Yep.
opinion, so that we have some official weigh-in on this before we make the decision as to either implement here or to seek legislation.
Yep. Okay.
All right, well, with that, why don't we move on to long-range calendar?
We got one?
So at the last discussion, I'll just sort of jump right in on this. Camille had, well, actually a few meetings before and then also just at the last one, this idea of discussing UC Davis as a potential voting member. I think we should agendize that for one of the meetings coming up. If not the first meeting, then perhaps the second meeting, where we can discuss the advisability of doing that or not doing that. Other than that, you know, I guess we just need to be alert that we might need a special meeting sometime in November or December regarding the two items ago. Anything from the other board members?
I just have another comment if we get written down.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that as we transition from the elderly members to the young members, I think not only in this situation, but particularly in this situation, need to spend some time with the new appointees with regards to the historical elements of this organization, why they are the way they are and why it was built and where those partners came from. Because I look around the room and there's not many people who were here at that time. And to remember
And when
that.
you go, there won't be anybody.
Yeah. So, you know, and that happens with our council as well. We get new people get elected and they don't know what the hell's going on. It takes them a while, you know, excuse me. But it's going to be the same way here. So I think one of the elements would be an opportunity for those who are your managers to sit down and do a little homework themselves so then they can share the history. And Dick has been here a long time too, so he could help. But I think that's critical if you're going to make decisions with regards to, you know, additional water or the university or the board of supervisors or whatever. And so there's specific reasons and where that history came from. So I think that's important. Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe for the January meeting, that's probably a little too soon, but perhaps for the April meeting, there could be a session to either at the meeting or perhaps prior to the meeting, there could be an on-site meeting or just to bring people up to speed in terms of what it is, and there could be a little bit of a history lesson. To Skip's point, and Will was involved with this as well, I think one of the things that I will remember as probably one of the most important things I did as a community member and ultimately as a council member was helping to have this be successful at the ballot and then being involved with the Davis City Council at the time. And I think to Skip's point, now that it's here, people may not realize what the future would have been like without this being here. And so I think some of this discussion came out, or some of these ideas came out when we were talking about potential voting changes, right? We wanted to make sure that the intent of the people who created this agency was respected, and also understanding that several of these ideas were very important to them because they wanted to make sure that this had a long-term viability and sustainability. So I leave that to staff to come up with something, but I would think that would be helpful not only for the new people, but for the existing folks as well.
You even got to recognize this is the first time the two city councils had talked in 20 years. Or 15 years, anyway. Yeah, it was a big deal.
Nice
it was a big deal. Yeah.
Potentially, that's true. we'll have to have a historian come forward and tell us whether that's true or not.
You know, Brett, I think we could characterize it as sort of a taking stock retreat. Maybe meet out at the treatment center, there's a nice room there, and talk about our history, where we are, and maybe talk about where we want to go. You know, are we in a caretaker role from now on, or do we have any public policy objectives involving water for the future? So, get them in your choices and go.
I think
Stan looks like he'd like to.
Yeah, I think we can definitely set up a program, workshop, if you will, to speak to where we've been and where we are going. Yeah.
Thank
And I
you.
suggest if we're going to do that, then we might want to invite some of those historical figures too. I'm sure Sid would be willing to come and.
Historical figures. That's very lofty.
Well, I think Skip was going there.
Skip will have the shortest retirement on record.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So any other items for long range? Staff, anything? Yes, Paul.
I'm sorry, just to tag in, it might be opportune, speaking of historical figures, I just wanted to note that depending on whether or not there's a special meeting and when that is, the Woodland Council will be reorganizing after this upcoming November election, and it's possible that as early as your next convening, we may have a new member, and just want to acknowledge Skip for his work in its original iteration and its current iteration. This is maybe Skip's last meeting as a director, and just want to acknowledge, thanks for all your help.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Skip.
Yeah, huzzah.
Skip, no per diem, no plaque. That's the way we are. Low overhead. We just deliver water.
There actually is a plaque.
Have a glass on us.
Yeah, you can have a glass for free.
All right, we'll move on to item 9, technical advisory comments. Do we have anything? Item 10, board member comments. Other than, thanks again, Skip. Although, if past is any predictor of future, somehow you'll manage to get back on this entity. Anyway, motion to adjourn.
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.